In this episode, we move into one of the most foundational ideas in the CIS Controls V8, Enterprise Asset Scope. At first glance, defining assets may sound simple. You might think an asset is just a laptop, a server, or a network device. But once you step into a real organization, the question of what counts as an enterprise asset becomes more complex and far more important. The accuracy of everything that follows in a security program depends on getting this right. If you do not know what you own, you cannot protect it, monitor it, or prove that it is secure. By the end of this discussion, you should be able to explain what qualifies as an enterprise asset, why scope definition drives control effectiveness, and who is responsible for ensuring the asset inventory remains accurate over time. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. An enterprise asset is any device, system, or computing resource that stores, processes, or transmits organizational data and falls under the organization's responsibility. That definition includes traditional physical devices such as servers, desktops, laptops, and network appliances. However, modern environments extend far beyond physical hardware. Virtual machines, cloud workloads, containers, mobile devices, and even some operational technology systems may qualify. The key is not the physical form of the asset, but its relationship to organizational data and accountability. If the organization is responsible for the data or the service running on a system, that system likely falls within enterprise asset scope. One of the most common beginner misconceptions is assuming that scope equals what is inside the corporate office network. That assumption is outdated. Remote work, cloud services, and hybrid environments have dissolved the idea that enterprise assets only exist within a building. A laptop used at home, but managed by the organization, is an enterprise asset. A virtual server running in a cloud provider's infrastructure is still an enterprise asset if the organization controls the configuration and data. Even devices that are temporarily connected to the network, such as contractor systems, can affect risk and therefore require scoping decisions. Scope must reflect operational reality, not nostalgia for simpler networks. Why does defining asset scope matter so much? Because nearly every other control depends on it. You cannot enforce secure configurations on assets you do not know about. You cannot manage vulnerabilities on systems that are not in your inventory. You cannot monitor activity on devices that were never scoped into logging requirements. When asset scope is incomplete, every downstream control becomes partially blind. On the exam, when you see a scenario involving failed monitoring, ineffective patching, or inconsistent enforcement, a root cause often traces back to incomplete or poorly defined asset scope. A well-defined scope also clarifies responsibility boundaries. In modern environments, organizations may share responsibility with cloud providers or managed service providers. Shared responsibility does not eliminate accountability. Instead, it requires clear delineation of which parts of the asset stack are managed by whom. For example, a cloud provider may manage the underlying infrastructure, but the organization may remain responsible for operating system configuration, identity management, and data protection. If asset scope does not explicitly define those boundaries, assumptions fill the gap. Assumptions are dangerous because they create unmonitored risk zones where no one is clearly accountable. Defining scope also requires distinguishing between owned, managed, and connected assets. Owned assets are directly purchased and controlled by the organization. Managed assets may be personally owned devices that are subject to organizational management policies. Connected assets may be third-party systems that interface with enterprise systems. Each category carries different risk and governance considerations. While not every connected asset may fall fully within enterprise scope, its interaction with enterprise data may require oversight. On the exam, understanding these distinctions helps you reason about what must be inventoried, monitored, or restricted. Another dimension of asset scope involves lifecycle status. Assets are not static. They are acquired, deployed, repurposed, and eventually retired. If scope definition only captures new deployments but ignores decommissioned systems, Orphan devices can remain active and vulnerable. Asset scope must therefore include processes for onboarding and offboarding assets. When an asset is added, it should be formally recorded, configured, and secured. When it is retired, it should be removed from inventories, sanitized if necessary, and decommissioned from monitoring systems. Lifecycle discipline prevents asset drift, which is when reality slowly diverges from documentation. Data sensitivity further complicates scope. Some assets may process highly sensitive information, while others handle less critical workloads. Although both fall within enterprise scope, they may require different levels of control intensity. Scope definition should therefore not only identify assets, but also categorize them according to risk and criticality. This categorization informs prioritization decisions, such as which systems require stricter monitoring or faster remediation timelines. On the exam, questions about prioritization often depend on understanding that scope includes risk context, not just asset existence. You should also consider the difference between logical and physical assets. Physical assets are tangible devices, but logical assets include cloud instances, software-defined networks, and identity systems. Logical assets can be spun up and down rapidly, especially in cloud environments. This dynamic nature increases the importance of automated discovery and reconciliation processes, which will be discussed in later episodes. For now, it is enough to recognize that scope must account for both static and dynamic assets. A static inventory in a dynamic environment quickly becomes inaccurate, and inaccurate scope undermines every dependent safeguard. Ownership of asset accuracy is another critical governance element. While technical teams often maintain the inventory, governance requires that someone be accountable for its completeness and correctness. That owner ensures reconciliation across sources, resolves discrepancies, and reports on inventory health metrics. Without defined ownership, inventories tend to degrade as systems change and projects introduce new assets. On the exam, if asked who should ensure asset inventory accuracy, the strongest answer usually reflects a clearly designated control owner with authority and oversight responsibility. Asset scope must also align with organizational boundaries. In mergers, acquisitions, or divestitures, asset responsibility can shift quickly. Failing to update scope during organizational change creates blind spots. New business units may introduce assets that were never inventoried. Divested units may leave behind systems still integrated with enterprise infrastructure. Governance processes should include scope review during major organizational events. This proactive update reduces exposure and demonstrates mature control management. It is worth emphasizing that asset scope is not only about technology, but also about trust. Stakeholders trust that the organization understands what it is protecting. Investors, customers, and regulators expect visibility into the systems that handle their data. A poorly defined scope signals weak oversight. Conversely, a clearly defined and maintained asset scope demonstrates operational discipline. That discipline builds confidence that other controls, such as configuration management and access control, rest on a solid foundation. As you prepare for the exam, practice articulating asset scope in plain language. Be able to explain what qualifies as an enterprise asset, how cloud and remote systems fit into scope, and why lifecycle management matters. When presented with scenario questions, ask yourself whether the root issue could involve missing or unclear asset definition. Often, the simplest foundational gap explains broader control failures. Recognizing that pattern helps you choose answers grounded in systemic reasoning rather than surface-level symptoms. In conclusion, defining enterprise asset scope is the starting point for effective cybersecurity control implementation. It clarifies what counts as an asset, extends beyond physical boundaries into cloud and remote environments, and integrates lifecycle and risk context considerations. It establishes ownership for accuracy and aligns responsibility across shared environments. Without clear scope, other controls operate in partial blindness. With clear scope, organizations gain visibility, accountability, and a stable foundation for every safeguard that follows. Understanding this foundational role prepares you to interpret exam questions with clarity and to see asset management not as an administrative task, but as the bedrock of disciplined security practice.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.